Foreign Affairs Minister Anita Anand just put out a statement responding to the bombshell new report on Canadian arms shipments to Israel. And rather than, launching an investigation into the companies involved and pledging to close loopholes, she instead called the report, quote, flawed, and stated that Global Affairs Canada have determined, quote, that a number of claims in the report are misleading and significantly misrepresent the facts. But do they? See, as soon as I saw this press release, I reached out to the report authors to see what their response was to it. And they got back to me with a press release that goes through her precise claims, and it seems like things aren't as clear-cut as she made it sound. See, according to World Beyond War, Palestinian Youth Movement, Canadians for Justice and Peace in the Middle East, and the Arms Embargo Now Campaign, quote, Minister Anand's statement today continues a pattern of deception. But before I dive too deep into their response, let's take a look at what exactly Minister Anand had to say. And as I read this to you, I want you to listen closely to what it does and doesn't say. Her release reads, quote, Canada has drawn and will continue to draw a hard line. Since January 2024, we have refused any new permits for controlled goods that could be used in Gaza. Not one has been approved. We went further by freezing all permits in 2024 that could have allowed military components to be used in Gaza, and those permits remain suspended today. The law is clear. No company can export controlled goods without a valid permit. We will not hesitate to ensure that those who violate this law face legal consequences, which include fines, seizures, and criminal prosecution. In other words, we will not allow Canadian-made weapons to fuel this conflict in any way. After examining the report released on July 29, 2025, Global Affairs Canada officials have determined that a number of claims in the report are misleading and significantly misrepresent the facts. She then provides 3 examples, which we will get to in a second, before concluding, quote, Canada continues to deny any export permits for materials that could be used in Gaza. We take any allegation of the circumvention of Canada's export regime very seriously and, if true, would be accompanied by severe legal sanctions. So right off the bat, there's a few red flags here. She isn't denying everything contained in the report, yet she still isn't apologizing. Because even if we accept the premise that there are no weapons or weapons parts that are made in Canada and end up in Israel, and that's a big if for reasons we'll get to in a second, there are still moral questions here. Not everything that could assist the Israeli military or that could be used in Gaza is a controlled good that requires an export permit. Training materials, for example, don't require an export permit, but they still help the Israeli military prepare its soldiers for what they go on to do in Gaza. Those materials might not be lethal, but the skills they're training the soldiers on are. And the IDF, Israel's military, goes on to use those skills in its genocide. I'm not sure that's great either. And you know what else technically isn't granting an export permit for goods that are used in Gaza? At least not on the face of it, and therefore appears to be compliant with our export permit regime as written, parts that go through the United States first. So that to me is revealing. Like, if we found out that Russian bombs were being dropped on Ukraine by drones using Canadian parts, do you think this statement would be the same? Oh, what's that now? We did find that out? And in response, the government leaned on the fact that it has heavy sanctions on Russia. And not only that, despite it going through intermediaries first before ending up in Russia, the company ended up working with the Canadian government to, quote, prevent its components from being used in an unauthorized manner. Interesting. It's almost like there are levers we can pull and things we can do to deal with these loopholes. Anyway, in response to this statement, the NGOs behind the report also raised concerns about the lack of verification behind Minister Anand's words. Quote, the statement does not deny that Canada continues to ship arms to Israel. It simply claims without a shred of proof that these weapons aren't being used in Gaza. This baseless assertion defies reality and conveniently sidesteps the absence of any system to verify it. It also defies previous government assertions that Canada was not arming Israel and that no new permits for any arms exports to Israel were to be approved. The report lays out in painstaking detail with the evidence of detailed shipping records and Israeli tax authority data that Canadian military exports, including F-35 components and ammunition, are still flowing to Israel as recently as last week. For over a year, we've been fed the same lies. Canada claims to have halted arms sales sales to Israel, and yet Canadian weapons continue to fuel this genocide. This is more of the same. Vague and shifting assertions from the government, particularly around permits that twist and turn to avoid accountability. If Canada truly wants to stop fueling this genocide, the solution is obvious: a full and immediate two-way arms embargo. Anything less is just an excuse to keep the status quo alive. The report authors then went through the specific contentions from Minister Anand of stuff that she says was misleading or misrepresented in their report. First, Anand's statement gives us this example. Quote, items identified as bullets are in fact paintball-style projectiles. They are accompanied by equipment designed to make a firearm inoperable with traditional rounds. These cannot be used in combat, and if they were, they would require a permit, which would not be granted. But here's the thing. According to the report authors, quote, the items identified as bullets in the report are identified as bullets by the Israeli Tax Authority, Customs Code 930-69010, valued at over $379,000 and categorized in Canadian HS codes in the category of, quote, bombs, grenades, torpedoes, mines, missiles, and similar munitions of war and parts thereof, cartridges and other ammunition and projectiles and parts thereof, including shot and cartridge wads. According to the Israel Tax Authority Customs Code, paintball markers and similar non-lethal arms such as air, spring, or gas-powered guns are classified under the heading 9304. Again, what they identified was under 9306. Using the ITA data, the report confirms that 175,000 military bullets were shipped from Canada to Israel in April 2025 alone, and that 500,000 bullets have been shipped since October 2023. Furthermore, the CBC, Toronto Star, and Canadian Press all independently verified this data and confirmed the ITA categorized the shipments as bullets. Even if the Canadian government is being truthful and the bullets are improperly categorized, it is unacceptable for Canada to be exporting hundreds of thousands of training bullets to Israel to fuel the genocide in Gaza. And I would add that if these were improperly categorized and they weren't actual bullets, then the evidence still existed, albeit incorrectly, that stated Canadian bullets were exported to Israel. Why didn't the government catch that, and how can it then turn around and assert that, quote, we will not allow Canadian-made weapons to fuel this conflict in any way if it's missing stuff like this? Like, how can it claim to know that? The next claim that Anand made was that, quote, no mortars have been shipped from Canadian manufacturers to Israel either directly or indirectly since before permits were suspended. The report authors point out, quote, we have not tracked such shipments in this report, but we note that the Canadian Commercial Corporation brokered a deal to export these to Israel. Recent U.S. State Department documents reveal that the General Dynamics Ordnance and Tactical Systems Inc. facility in Quebec is the named contractor for a newly approved $83.7 million sale of 50,000 high-explosive mortar cartridges to the Israeli military. This purchase was to be transferred to the U.S. and then on to Israel. It's not looking good, folks. And Anand's last example was, quote, at no time are explosive materials such as bullets or other munitions transported on passenger aircraft. To claim otherwise is simply false. And here's what the report authors had to say, quote, while we are relieved to hear that explosive materials are not being transported on Canadian commercial flights underneath passengers, which the report did not claim, what this report showed was a range of military components going on commercial jets, and since the report's publication, this has been confirmed by one of the companies themselves, who responded to a Toronto journalist to confirm F-35 parts were shipped on commercial jets. Yikes. So I have an idea. How about our government stops spending its time arguing about semantics and starts putting that energy into ensuring that Canadian-made weapons, weapons parts, and training materials aren't fueling a genocide in Gaza? I mean, come on. What do you think of all this?